Hello, Mike Predator006 with Card Runners. I am honored and excited to join the Card Runners team. My first video that I have produced is on capitalizing with Ace Ace XX in PLO8. It will be a format of both PowerPoint as well as a hand history review of some examples of hands that I've played. And without further ado, let's jump into it. So Predator, why are we doing a video on just playing Ace Ace XX hands? As far as the importance of these type of hands, there is an extreme correlation between how well somebody plays Ace Ace XX and their overall win rate. As you can see, it's a very small proportion of hand that you're going to get an Ace Ace XX hand, and if you look at some of the positive players' win rates that I pulled up some regulars from 2009 just to kind of examine it. And if you look at the people who have high win rates, they're playing Ace Ace XX very well. If you look at some of the lower win rates, you have a negative 5.7 big blinds 100. And their win rate with Ace Ace is only 102 big blinds out of 100. Here's someone that's 39. They have a negative overall win rate. So as you can see, with this strong correlation, some people's total winnings come from just their Ace Ace hands, and they could be break-even players on everything else. So if you can get the Ace Ace hands to be as profitable as some of these other players, obviously you'll see extreme impacts on your win rate. When I look at the different types of Ace Ace hands, I pretty much put them in 4 different categories. And obviously you have your premium ones that are your Ace Ace 2s, Ace Ace 3s, Ace Ace 4s, maybe that are suited. It does help if one or both of these aces are suited. But either way, these type of hands are going to be in the top 1 to 2 percentile of every PLO8 hand. So they're extremely valuable and profitable when you do see those. Your good Ace Ace hands are going to include maybe like a unsuited 4x or a couple cards between 5 and 8 that give you the potential to make a random low as a backup. Also, you're going to have your aces that also have another pocket pair, etc. Some other combinations similar to these. You're going to have your aces that have a couple Broadway cards, and these give you some rundown and straight potentials in addition to having your pair of aces. Obviously, we would love for them to be suited also. And then you're going to have your aces that are considered bad. They don't really have two-way potential. Your Ace Ace 8 Jack, Ace Ace 9 10, 7 Queen, etc. They just don't play well, especially out of position, and you'll see some examples of that in the following slides. How we play aces is dependent on 3 different criteria. First and foremost, it is dependent on our image. There is a vast difference between someone that raises 3 to 5% of PLO8 hands and someone raises 15 to 20% of PLO8 hands. Obviously, if you are on the tighter side of the spectrum, people are going to automatically assume you have something that may include an Ace Ace as something in your range that you would raise with. So we need to know what our image is and how it applies to playing these type of hands, especially out of different positions. Next is our effective stack size. If we're playing at a table with a couple short stacks, we're going to play our aces differently versus if we're out of position against a lot of deep players. So obviously our effective stack size is important, and our position. And throughout the rest of the video, I split some of the hand histories we're going to look at out of early position, middle position, late position, and the blinds. So, in early position, we're going to limp with the majority of our aces. With many different stack sizes at the table, I'll typically limp with 3 to 4 categories of aces. Now, that 4th category, the bad category, the Ace Ace, 8 Jack, etc. like that, I have no problem folding those hands in early position. They're not going to play well, especially out of position, and if we do hit an ace, we're still not guaranteed to have equity in the hand versus somebody who's willing to put a lot of chips in. So the primary reason why we want to limp is to be able to trap post flop when we hit a big hand, and if we limp in early position, we're not giving away the fact that we have ace-ace and polarizing our raising range in early position. Raising pre-flop with aces generally puts you in an awkward position post-flop because in PLO8 you're not really going to have too many hands where you're going to raise and take it. Like in No Limit Hold'em you may. In PLO8 you're going to get 2 or 3 callers in position on you, and unless your 2 side cards are low and suited and you flop a nut low draw with your overpair with aces with maybe a flush draw or something like that, you're going to be in a really awkward position to play post-flop. Consider folding the bad class of aces. I mentioned that up in this area that I don't have any problems folding them. You're really set mining if you do choose to play bad aces, and if you're hoping to hit an ace, there may also be a couple low cards on the board, and so you could be being free rolled the whole time. So consider folding those, please. After limping in early position, if there's a raise and a couple callers, or if there's a lot of action behind you, consider pushing pre-flop and getting your stack to pot ratio to be 1 to 2, so you can pretty much bet out on any flop. So there's a couple examples of that throughout the hands we'll look at. When we go through the hands, I displayed my HUD here, and I'm going to be keeping this as long as I play. I've got it set up where it's extremely easy for me to follow, and I use it. It's an extremely valuable tool for me in a lot of decisions I make. The numbers I keep on here for PLO8: VPIP, pre-flop raise, called pre-flop raise, 3-bet, fold the flop continuation bet. I'm sorry, flop continuation bet, fold the flop continuation bet, the number of hands, and the total dollars up or down. If you can tell, the called pre-flop raise percentage is categorized by a red, yellow, or green, and I make a lot of decisions pre-flop based on what color this is, as well as the color of fold to continuation bet. I make a lot of post-flop decisions based on what color this is. So those are the 2 main things that I really look at, but I like to have everything else on there also. So digging into the hand histories for aces played in early position, just to give you an example of how I'm doing it. The blinds in this game are $2 and $4, and I am under the gun. I ended up limping in, and I have multiple callers behind me and a raise by a short stack. With this type of hand, we have 2 options. We can, obviously, when it gets back to us, we can consider raising, or we can just smooth call. Now the thing is, if we raise, if we make it 50 or so, we've got 3 stacks behind us that are both at 100, that are all at 100 big blinds or more, and the short stack, if we ended up raising and we got a couple callers here, if he didn't push, we'd be in bad shape. If he pushed, we'd be able to isolate, obviously, and we would do that with this hand versus a short stack all the time. But we don't want these guys coming along having position behind us in a large pot with not that great of an ace-ace hand. So I ended up just calling here, as well as everybody did, which that's going to happen. If they're limping, they're obviously going to call for $8 more with the implied odds they have with almost any hand. So we flop top set on a rainbow board, which is extremely important. So we're obviously losing to king-queen right now. So we have a couple options, and I chose to check and play it a little tricky. I don't necessarily know if I was in this situation again. I think I would probably bet this flop. I ended up checking, and we get a bet from the short stack. Now, if anyone has king-queen, they're not going anywhere. hopefully they don't have flush redraws and things like that. But uh, the thing is, this is a small stab at this pot. So I'm going to go ahead and raise here. If someone comes along with me that has king queen, I'm not going to be in that bad of a shape, that bad of a position versus them with top set, hoping the board will pair, obviously. And I end up raising. We push everybody out except for the short stack better. And the short stack better has two blockers with the kings and a set of tens, and we are in extremely good against him as an 80-20 favorite. And we get there. We stay there. So I'm not really focused too much on the results, but I just kind of wanted to go over some early position plays. That's a good example. And looking at the next hand, we have Ace Ace 2-7 in a premium class of Ace Ace hands. Suited 2 is wonderful, and we limp, and we get a razor right behind us. We shouldn't be looking at his cards. Let's pretend we didn't see those. And by the time it gets around to us, nobody else calls. So we have two options. We could smooth call his raise. If we raise, we can only make it, what, $14 or so, and we don't get enough of our stack in pre-flop to be able to consider doing that, in my opinion. He's going to call with any 4 cards, and we're going to be playing out of position, and we flip over our cards and pretty much tell him exactly what we have should we choose to do this. So we see a flop, and we flop top set with a bad low draw. Now, some of the he's gonna have an ace typically, so 2 of his other 3 cards would have to be spades for him to have a spade draw. He could easily have an ace with a low draw. So, and obviously we saw that, and that is what he had. So we're going to look to check raise in this situation. I did check. He bet 7. I'm raising to 31. We're going to try to get as much of our stack in right now as we can. He ends up calling. The 9's a fine card for us to continue on because it's not that likely with the combinations of having to have 2 out of 3 of these to be spades that he's going to have it. He's more likely on that low draw with an ace, and we want to try to push him off so he doesn't complete a low draw right now. And if we bet pot and he happens to call, if he ends up getting the low, that's more than, we did our job by getting our money in this situation. So he had an ace 2-3-9. That 9, he assumed it was a good card for him, but obviously we have him pretty killed. His equity comes from having the low draw. He scoops with a 5 as his only card he scoops with, and we end up scooping on the river with the 2. When I looked at my hand history to try to find some early position hands to review, I didn't have a lot of 9-handed history, so I know this is 6-handed. It's in first position. This is on the border between early and middle position typically, but in a 6-handed game, I've got the capability to be able to raise from first position and without really polarizing and defining my range. I'm doing this with a large majority of my ace 2s, ace 3s, aces, high hands, my high rundowns. I'm doing it with wide enough range where players cannot put me on this type of hand when I raise. And like I said before, when you raise in early position, you're going to get a lot of callers behind you. So unless you feel comfortable playing post flop out of position with this type of hand, you've got to be able to let go of it when the time's right too. And you don't want to get in trouble. But in this situation, we've got the overpair with the nut flush draw and a backdoor second nut low draw. So we're going to be betting this when it gets around to us. And we have a raise, and when I consider the cards that I have, I've got the nut flush draw. He's not going to have a pair of 9s calling, typically not going to have a pair of nines or a pair of threes. He's most likely got a pair of kings. That's really the only hand that we could put him on. And, just calling here, all the money's going to end up getting in. If the board pairs, I may be able to get away from it. But either way, we're going to end up... if I'm going to call a bet, I may as well make one just in case he's on that queen, jack 10. Something like a wrap where he may see that and look to fold it in this situation. Most likely not. He's going in either way, but he ends up calling, and he did end up having the kings as well as the second nut flush draw. Let's not be results oriented. Hitting that ace, I take that ace out of the equation. I don't think I play it any differently, even knowing his hand. But raising in early position with people that are susceptible to call behind you. This guy's calling 89% of pre-flop raises. I mean, you look around the table, 26, 15, 89, 28, and 10. You're not going to raise and take it as much in this game as you are in no limit hold'em. So typically in early position, like I said, we're going to want to play a little trappy and tricky and limp with most of our aces. Here's another six-handed hand. We weren't supposed to see that, but let's play it through while seeing that, and we'll examine his play also. So we raise again from early position, 50-cent dollar, and we get 3 callers. And once again we flop the nut flush draw, but this time we have the second nut low draw to go with it, and we are more than willing to play for stacks in most situations here. We get a caller behind us. That call is amazing to me. And with that queen, he's most likely not really going anywhere. So, but we bet on here also, assuming that he shouldn't have a 10-9 in his hand. A hand that I would probably put him on with a flop call is an ace-2 with maybe a pair, maybe not a pair, and just can't get away from it. When I have the ace of hearts, we know he's most likely not on a flush draw. So he may have like ace 2, 5, 7 in most situations, something like that in this hand. And he calls and hit the queen, and I feel 100% that I'm winning here, and I do a value bet on the river that gets called by a hand that beats me. Interesting play here, but you see a lot of this type of play in PLO8 games, and that's how I've made my living over the last couple of years, and it's unfortunate this ended up coming out on the river, but it happens. As we move on to middle position, the most significant factor when we choose to play ace-ace hands, whether we open raise or call, is dependent on our image more in this position than anywhere else. If our pre-flop raise percentage is high enough that we don't give away the fact that we have aces, raising's ideal. Obviously, we want to build the pot, and something I didn't put in here that I also want to mention is it has a lot to do with the players behind you, and if they're called pre-flop raise percentage is high, I'm more likely to limp in that situation. But if we think we could get down to 1 or 2 players, I'm going to typically raise. If your pre-flop raise percentage is low, you may define your hand to an observant player. You may really polarize your range of having aces if they have a significant sample size on you. If this is the case, you need to change it up occasionally. But in the long run, my recommendation is probably to get that pre-flop raise percentage up so they cannot put you on that specific type of hand. 3-betting from middle position turns your hand over. So if you have an early position raise and it comes up to you, you need to consider the implications before you choose to 3-bet, because 3-bet percentages in PLO8 are typically so small. Most players are between 0 and 4%, and I would say 95 to 99% of the time someone 3-bet to you, solid regular, they're going to have aces, and typically even a category 1 ace hand with your 2, 3, or 4 as one of your other cards. So consider the implications before you 3-bet, and maybe consider to play it tricky if you're put in this situation. And obviously, if you have the opportunity to get a third of your chips or so in pre-flop, you want to do it with the category 1 and 2 hands. When you do end up 3 or 4 betting and leave yourself behind a stack to pot ratio of 1 to 2, we're going to be betting out the majority of any flops that come out on the board. So let's go ahead and look at some middle position hands with aces and how some of these apply to actual play. So the first one we have is another one of the premium category aces with a suited 4-10. We have a couple limpers from early position, and this is a good opportunity to raise. Hopefully I could get by two somewhat tight pre-flop players and get position on one, if not both of these guys calling pre-flop. And we just build an extremely large pot pre-flop, $55 on a 1-2 game. And we flop a huge hand. So what's our goal here? Our goal is to, if one person comes in, we want everybody to come in, but we're fine with just winning this hand right now, or putting pressure on somebody that's going to call with a low draw and hope that it doesn't come to fruition by the turn, and we could put some more pressure on them. So we get a bet. Let's think about this. We get a bet, a pot-sized bet from someone with $106 behind. So we have two choices. We could shove and most likely get heads up against somebody that is, the majority of the time they just have a low draw, and maybe they have a pair and a low draw. I suppose they could have kings or sixes, but do we want to go ahead and push everybody else out? If we call, we want everybody else to call, but the thing is, I don't think a lot of people are going to just call with a low draw for $55, $57. So, this is a time where I would be able to push here. I'm going to get heads up against him. Let's flip over his cards. We are against a set of sixes, and we get in as a 90% favorite. And we happen to lose, but that happens sometimes. So let's not focus on the result again. Let's look at getting it as a 90% favorite, and it was perfectly played in my opinion. Moving on to the next hand, we've got an ace-ace-4 king. It's on the border between a premium and a second tier hand. When it gets to us with everybody folding, we're going to be opening every time with this hand. And we get 3-bet from small blind with $66 behind. There's no sense in calling and playing it tricky. In Hold'em, you may just smooth call with aces and do something tricky on the flop, but there's no sense in doing that. He's never going to get away from that. And if he calls, he only has $35 behind and a $70 pot, and we're going to obviously go all in with any hand. So we bet pot, and we get in against a backdoor low draw and a gut shot as a 64-36 favorite. So let's move on to the next hand. Let's take off that. Moving on to the next hand, we have an ace-ace-4-7 double suited. We're raising. We get 3-bet from someone who is extremely deep and appears to be an aggressive player when you're playing him, but his stats are somewhat controlled. He is a winning regular, and I have no problems with re-raising him here. It does flip our hand over, but with our SPR less than 1 post-flop, we're going to be doing it with this strong ace-ace hand every time. and he bets into us, and we're calling. Flipping cards over, he has a pair and an inside wrap, and I really like his play by betting into us there, rather than there's no. It's kind of silly for him to. He doesn't want to check raise or check call. Betting into us is a good situation here because he may think he may think that he has some fold equity against aces, but I don't really even if he happened to have two pairs, the best that he's going to bet into us with. Anything better, he's going to be check raising. So I feel comfortable with my position with calling my getting all in on this flop. But you look at the odds here. We're only 57-43 in this situation. So it ended up working out, I believe. But moving on to the next hand. Ace 2-3, the granddaddy of all PLO8 hands. It is single suited, which is great. We are 3-betting from an early position raiser. We're telling him that we have an extremely strong hand. My 3-bet percentage is probably in the 4 to 5% range. So you can't really put me. I do it with other hands other than aces. You can't put me on that every time, but large majority of the time I'm going to have aces in this situation. And this is by far the strongest ace hand you can have with counterfeit protection. And we get a caller, and he's going to probably end up going with this. Now, why he check raises, I prefer to probably just bet out with that hand. He's a 69-31 dog, so why not bet out and price yourself into calling if I should raise. And we end up winning the hand with our top pair and nut low. Moving on to the next hand. Ace 3-7. We have a short stack raiser. We are going to 3-bet him every time in this situation to isolate him. But we get somebody that comes along with us. Outlaw. Okay, so we have a paired board. The majority of the times, they're not going to be playing a hand with a 9 in it, typically. So I'm betting out here. If he happens to have a 9, it's too bad, but most of the time he's not going to. And he ends up going all in, and he had a flush draw and a gut shot and a backdoor second nut low. So here we have not that great of an ace in middle position, and we follow the trail of limpers. Maybe someone here that's a little bit shorter than everybody else will end up raising. So we have a raise right behind us from a 43-6 player and a call. If we get any more calls, there's no doubt of what we're going to do here. We're popping it to 190, which is pretty much committing ourselves to the hand. Hopefully we can force Ambro out, and then he'll be all in. He's most likely all in. Lumba may consider to fold, but we're going to go ahead and try to get stacks in here, even with this poor of an ace hand. And we pot the flop. Let's kind of go back to the flop and pull up everybody's cards. So we get all in against two pair with an open-ended straight draw. We have 20%, 28% equity on this flop. I don't know why it's not showing everybody else's. And the turn is terrible for us, which gives him a wheel wrap and a flush draw, and puts the low draw out on the board for him. So we're down to 25% equity in the hand. We do still have 25%, which isn't bad, but we pretty much need the board to pair other than a queen. We need a ace 3. Well, no, ace won't help us. We need a 3 or 4, pretty much, or a king that would give us Broadway. And the 10 ends up coming up to give Lumba Broadway. So there could be a debate whether or not to do what I did pre-flop. I mean, I could very well just call that $30 when it came around to me, and probably just check folded the flop. That's well, if he would have this guy would have ended up betting out on the flop, I could have probably justified a call since he only had 23 bucks and the pot was, 140. But this, I chose to push here, assuming that I could get all in against one, maybe two other players, and this is the poor end of my spectrum that I would do that with. But there's danger in doing it. But you can see throughout the hand, even up against all these players, I still had my share of equity in the hand. So I may change that in the future, but just to show you guys how it ended up working out. Moving on to playing aces in late position, what we're going to look to do, we're typically going to be raising with the majority of our ace-ace hands, especially to get position on a early position limper. We're going to use that position to make post-flop decisions, and we also want to give the appearance that we are attempting to steal the blinds when in all actuality we have a strong hand. The primary question that comes up is whether or not we need to 3-bet. And obviously, if like I mentioned before, if your 3-bet percentage is extremely low, you're going to you may as well put the cards on your forehead and show everybody else. It's going to be extremely apparent what you have. You really polarize your 3-bet range to have this type of hand. But sometimes even if you tell them what you have position, and you get a lot of money in pre-flop with a small stack to pot ratio. It's not a bad option to do with certain hands. Also, we can choose to call behind a couple raisers to win big pots. We can get tricky and hope to hit monster flops and at least three-quarter people that are willing to put a lot of money in with a one-way hand. Also, aces can be good bluff catchers when the flop and turn has a paired board, especially if somebody bets out on a certain street and you have aces for an overpair, there's a pair on the board, and you have a low draw as a backup. Sometimes it's good to if they did happen to have trips, then you have your low draw as a backup. But a lot of people make a move against somebody who they think have aces when there is a high board or a pair board, something to that effect. Moving on to some hand histories to give us the situations. We are currently on the button with an extremely strong hand. We are raising pre-flop. We get a caller behind in a 2-4 game from the big blind. Everybody else folds. We've got the nut low draw with an overpair with a bad flush draw. We are going to be getting all in on this flop should he choose, if he happens to check raise us here. And let's go ahead and flip over his cards and see that we are 75%. We have 75% equity in this hand against his overpair to the board, which we have beat, and his flush draw. So we're pretty much playing against a flush draw right now, but half of his outs give us the low, so we're in extremely good shape here. Moving on to the next hand, we are on the button again with the ace-ace 4-7. I'm raising every time. We get 3-bet here. Now, do we want to call behind or 4-bet? Depending on who it is, his 3-bet percentage is on the higher range, and I don't think he's going to fold to a 4-bet. So he ends up calling. I should have once again turned his cards over, but we see that he has top pair with backdoor low draw. And once again, I do like his, whether I like his pre-flop play or not. I really like his bet on the flop with two high cards. He's not that big of a dog against naked ace ace here, which is exactly what we have. But we still have 65% of the equity in the hand, and we ended up winning that hand. Another hand on the button, ace ace 4-5, a lot stronger. Well, we end up 4-betting here. A min raise. That's interesting that he would min raise with this hand from the small blind. I think that's not a profitable play in the long term. Now, once again, he flopped very similarly to that last hand. If I were in his situation, I would bet this out. Why you would want to check raise? You pretty much want to bet and commit yourself to calling the last, $80, thinking that you're only a 60-40 in this situation. So no need to check raise there for sure. And we end up winning that hand. So moving on, kind of late position here. We've got a very passive, a 59-5 player that raised pre-flop. Chose to 3-bet here. I'm going to do that with these extremely strong hands in position against a raiser. And I'm more than willing to get the money in with that type of flop. And let's see what the equities were on the flop. I have 77% equity on the flop versus, well, he actually had an ace-ace hand also, which, fits right in line with his stats, 59-5. It doesn't 3-bet much, so he probably doesn't 4-bet at all. Especially with the ace-ace high hand, it doesn't play that well, even against, ace 2-3 X. So, I don't mind his pre-flop play, but post-flop with this board, he has the ace of spades, so it's questionable for him what he's doing. If I were him and that 5 came out on the turn, I would probably end up potting into. If you're going to call an all-in, you may as well bet it when that 5 comes up to try to push me off a random ace 2 or ace 2 with some type of spades or ace 2-4. So. Next hand we are 4-handed, but we are in position on the button. We are raising. We end up getting 3-bet. We 4-bet and get called. Here's an example of the aces being kind of a bluff catcher. I do have a backdoor low draw also. So it goes check check on the flop. 10 of spades comes to give us the flush draw. He bets pot. I really don't know if he would necessarily do that with a king. But he could very well have. I don't think he does that with a king. I think he's still trying to. Well, he may put out a 100 or 150, but I don't think he pots with a queen or with a king. So we call, and he's drawing to a 7. All right, moving on. We have one of my favorite hands, a double suited ace 2 king. We are raising, we get a caller, and we're out of position with it. We've got a gut shot, we've got nut flush draw, we've got a pair of aces, we've got a backdoor club draw and a backdoor nut low draw. Betting pot into him, and we get a call. We turn another card that gives us an excellent. It's a good card. Half of the deck we win, more than half of the deck, and He calls behind. So now the board pair's on the river. Do we put him on a hand that has a 10 on it on the flop? There's a chance that he has any type of wrap, a high wrap. There's a chance that he has two pair. It very well could include a 10. I think that with the amount of money that was out there pre-flop and with my bet on the flop, if I had two pair in this situation against somebody that three bet that I could put him on aces, I'd probably push into him and make them make a decision whether or not they want to play for stacks. But he goes ahead and bets here. I end up calling just to show you that people do make that type of move. He did it with a counterfeited two pair. So sometimes, like I said, these are bluff catchers, and you could just let them take control of the hand in this situation, and the majority of the time, you're probably still going to be good. Our last late position hand, we've got double suited ace ace 3-6. So here we go for the example of how to get tricky. We just call behind. You know, for some reason, maybe somebody will raise behind. Even if they don't, we've got an extremely strong two-way hand, and he is never going to put us on this. So we have a $13 bet. We're raising here. We're going to put him on an ace. He may have some type of low. Maybe he has two pair, and we're hugely ahead of his hand. And we get a 3-bet from the person that we have a check raise from the first person to act here. He folds, we push, they call. Yeah, there's not too many other hands he could have other than like ace 2 3 4 or something like that. And then again, I don't necessarily know that if I push with an ace 2 3 4. I obviously with jacks he doesn't put me on aces. But that was great for a good example of a tricky way to play a ace ace hand. And we end up with the flush with a live 3 for a low. As we get into playing ace-ace hands out of the blinds, I believe that raising with any ace-ace hand out of the blind is a huge leak, especially when the effective stack sizes are over 30 big blinds. Obviously, if you have a couple short stacks present at the table, there's some reasons that you'd want to raise and 3-bet in those situations, but the majority of the time, a lot of players at PLO8 games are typically deeper. So I don't care if I have ace ace 2 3 double suited and I have a raise from the button. If I've got that hand in the small blind, I'm going to mostly try to trap, and when I hit, I'm going to be at least quartering someone, if not scooping them. They won't put you on that type of hand. And you know, I mentioned 3-betting is also not a great option when you're deep. And when we play this way, we are going to trap when we hit a big hand. You know, I've raised from late position with a wide range of hands, and have been 3-bet from one of the blinds, and you automatically put them on ace ace. Hands that play well against an ace ace are going to be your PLO hands, your high rundowns. A lot of hands, low double suited cards are going to be good. You're going to and the thing is, I'm not really going, if I'm 100 big blinds or deeper, as well as the 3-better, I'm never folding to a 3-bet when I'm in position against a blind that 3-bets that I put them on aces. I'm just going to call, and if I have enough equity post flop when I hit, I'm going to choose to put pressure on him and get my money in as a favorite to stack him. Let's see how some of these traps ended up working out. In this situation, I am in the small blind. I get a middle position raiser. I'm never gonna three bet here when we're both deep, relatively deep. We obviously both have 100 big blinds. So here we flop a monster. We're gonna get all in here. We're gonna check raise him, which is the primary move that you would do with this strong a hand in this situation. And we're betting with the 6 and 7 coming out against a flush draw with a 3-5 low. So we end up scooping that pot. Well, we get to see his cards and how he plays this one also. So we have a raiser, late position. We're just calling again. We flop the nut low draw, uncounterfeitable with a pair of aces. We are looking to get our stack in. We're betting any turn that comes up here. Any turn. I can't think of one that I'm not betting. And you have to think that our overpair is good here. In addition to our ace-3, our nut low. Always bet this. Don't hope that he'll put in more money by check calling. So I'll always bet that river there, and we end up scooping. So we're playing tricky, and it's working out. Sometimes it doesn't. I'm sure we'll see that here soon. We're playing tricky. We have a cutoff raise, and by the time it gets back to a round, we have someone that made a min 3 bet. So now we are going to raise. We're going to put in, 30% of our stack. And should he just call and invite him in, we're potting almost any flop. We are potting any flop under for stack post flop. So, and we get in against queens and jacks. So he's got actually quite a few outs against us. We're 58% equity on that flop. 63 after the king, and we win the hand. Okay, here's one of our double paired high hands, and this is going to be a good example. Well, the jacks ended up being great for us. We bet out here. A lot of times our opponents won't really put us on a set. They'll probably put us more like on a flush draw or 2 pair. And we have a raise here, and we're obviously going to get all in if we happen to be up against a flush draw, which we are, but we're up against a flush draw as well as a little mini wrap here. Not so mini, but a pretty big wrap. And we are in as a dog with top set, which, having top set without any of the blockers and things that he needs to complete his hand is interesting how we're underdogs here. And we end up losing. Next hand. We have an under the gun raiser by a competent player. And here we go. I chose to 3-bet with the ace-ace-2, a suited ace, from the small blind. I mentioned how that's kind of a leak. He's never folding here. And here's our flop. So we flop the nut flush draw. We bet pot. He goes all in, and we are obligated to call. And he has 2 pair. He has flush blockers. We end up getting in as a 50% favorite, which is okay, but this This kind of shows the example of how when you 3-bet out of the blinds, you're never going to really get someone to fold because, especially when you both have 100 big blind or more stacks, they've got the implied odds to try to hit a hand like this. If we just had the aces without a flush draw, he'd probably be in the 60-65 percentile. And that was a beautiful card on the turn, ended up sucking out on the river. Alright, so we've got another great hand out of the small blind, and we're looking at a 45 big blind stack and a 35 big blind stack that called here. We 3-bet it, and it's only called by the smaller of the two stacks. When we raise like that, we're obligated to pot the flop and, number one, hope he misses, and number two, hope that he makes a bad play with knowing that we have a pair of aces. So we pot, and he puts us all in. We're a 60% favorite against a pair of twos with a backdoor low everything draw. And we lose the hand to twos and fours. But this kind of shows the dangers of 3-betting pre-flop out of the blinds. Alright, this hand will play up. It's we've got an ace jack 10 out of the big blind. Got a raise, a caller, and a caller, and I choose to bet 30, which will give us a SPR should somebody choose to call of around 3 for the effective stack sizes. And we get a call and a raise with a 2, 6, 7, 10. We're pushing. We get called. Let's look at these equities. The highest equity is the ace 2 king 8 double suited, 41%. If this 8 was lower than his 6, he'd have a lot more equity. But if his ace or 2 come on the flop, he's counterfeited, and this guy will end up getting the low. So that's where he loses some equity to this guy. And we're in as a 36% favorite with our ace high hand. I don't advocate getting all in with this hand unless you're isolating a shorter stack, which we were kind of trying to do with this guy, but it didn't ended up working out with his strong hand. So now we've got 18% equity after that flop. We need to hope for a 5 or running something, and we're drawing dead. So, I mean, this kind of the blind play is a significant leak, and being able to plug that and just playing a little more passively out of the blinds is going to be optimal. When you get more experience and become extremely confident in this game, you can open up your ranges a little bit more to do some more crafty plays. If you're not going to commit to a hand, should you miss a flop completely, and it's a flop that's evident to hit someone else, you can get away from it. I'm sorry, but it's blind play. It has a big impact on this game. Well, this is going to wrap up our first lesson on playing Ace XX and PLO8 and capitalizing with it. Like I said before, I am honored to be part of the Card Runners team. I look forward to making more videos in the future, and I don't know how much of my content is going to come over from stocks, but I like to let you guys know that I'm a very active member of all forums, so please feel free to ask any questions throughout any of the forums. And this is Mike Predator006 signing off for Card Runners. Thank you.